Kids movies aren't exactly great. Take some of the more modern stuff Disney and Pixar have been pumping out, like Elemental or Haunted Mansion. It's for sure not something I would call worth my time, even if it's going to see it with other people. But that's not to say that children's movies can't be good for audiences of all ages, despite being made for an audience of children. Take stuff like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, to relative classics like Coco, WALL-E, Big Hero 6, most Studio Ghibli films. These were all bangers after bangers that I can confidently say that I personally enjoyed watching growing up, and can say that I still think bring a lot to the table for adults when it comes to themes, symbolism, cinematography, and even just the general message of the story. Growing up in the mid-2000s, it was an interesting era for shows, especially if you were lucky enough to experience media from all over. From the Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network bangers like Victorious, iCarly, Adventure Time, and Courage the Cowardly Dog, to anime legends like Detective Conan, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Doraemon. If anything, there definitely was a lot of variety. Among all the shows and franchises I fell in and out of love with, there was always one that kind of held a special place in my heart. Not because it was particularly good, or because the plot impacted me, or because I was blown away by the visuals as a kid, but because all my friends and I watched it together every day after school. And we'd talk about it day after day after day during breaks back when we were kids. And that show was Ultraman. The original live-action one I used to watch can only be described as jank, and quite frankly, I can probably only watch it ironically these days just to get a good laugh. But without a doubt, as a kid, I admired Ultraman. We used to copy his moves, and all of us had multiple figurines to make up fake scenarios in our heads while we played with them. And I know, over the years, it's not like they didn't try to revive the franchise. A memorable one for me was the Ultraman TV show on Netflix in 2019-ish. Although it looked interesting enough, I decided to pass on it because, quite frankly, it just seemed like the same stuff recycled again and again and again. So when Ultraman Rising was announced in the summer of this year, I was tentative to say the least. Well, that was until I watched the trailer.
Come to, Daddy.
And that was when I started asking myself a few questions. Are we for real getting the Asian version of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? So does that mean this is going to be a goddamn masterpiece like that movie? And, well, let's just say Ultraman Rising did not disappoint. Telling the story of Kenji Ken Sato, a successful but flawed baseball player and son of Ultraman who inherited his powers, Ultraman Rising surprisingly tells a heartfelt story about something that has nothing to do with superheroes and everything to do with superheroes at the same time. Plot-wise, I think the overarching story is told quite well actually for a kids movie. It has enough twists and turns to keep me on the edge of my seat, and while it did have the hallmarks of being a kids movie, it didn't really hold back when they wanted to express a few more mature themes like grief, loss, and even things like anxiety and imposter syndrome. Throughout the film, Ken learns to become a more caring and compassionate person, reconcile his relationships, and not be obsessed with things like success, achievement, and pride. Gripping as the plot was, I think that was only made possible through the characters and their relationships. And my god, the characters are so goddamn good. From the egotistical but flawed Ken, the sweet and caring Professor Sato, the humorous and cool Emiko, the compassionate and strong Ami, and many, many more. But first off, let's start with my man Kenji Sato. I've always ran with the idea that if a movie can make me dislike a character, it means it was at least pretty well written. And goddamn, I thought Ken was both a psycho dickhead and insanely cool at the start of the movie at the same time. I think a lot of what made Ken such a great character for me was the transition from him at the beginning of the movie to the end of it, highlighting his change in nature. Ken's backstory isn't exactly what I would call a heartwarming childhood, with his father being Ultraman and all the while having to live in the shadow of something so great. Ken had reservations and frankly a bit of trauma following in his father's footsteps. Of course, that wasn't helped by his mother's disappearance, causing Ken to return to Japan despite him being successful as a star player for the LA Dodgers. Having him showcase all his anxiety, his feeling of not being good enough, him taking it out on his father despite him being the only family left, and him breaking down was really surprising in a good way to me. I think that including stuff like being overburdened with responsibility, feeling like you have to do everything yourself, and having to carry on some sort of expectation that you don't really understand is definitely not what I expected to be in an Ultraman movie, but a welcome addition nonetheless. Seeing him then grapple with those feelings by raising Emmy, a baby kaiju, was not only heartwarming but also beautiful in a way, as you can see Ken slowly but surely becoming more mature, knowing how to prioritize things, and then finally essentially becoming someone who he wants to be, instead of living in the shadow of everybody else. Contrasting those experiences with the one Ami has with her daughter and mother in the film, it was great to see Ken transform into a man that can be proud of himself. Growing up, and even today, I've definitely felt those feelings a lot, and know that many others have too. In a way, when I was watching Ken, I could kind of see a part of myself in him, and that felt like a surreal experience personally. I think Ultraman Rising was the first time where I watched a movie and felt connected and a bit immersed in a more personal way, as opposed to being an objective third party watching a film. And if that doesn't say anything about Ken's character, then I honestly don't know what does. In a quite similar fashion, I think Professor Sato, or Ken's dad, was also a beautifully written supporting character. Equally as flawed as Ken, Professor Sato took on the role of being the relatively absent father in Ken's life due to his work as Ultraman, needing to save Japan from the kaiju threats while Ken and his mom moved to LA. Obviously, this created a rift between Professor Sato and his son, which the movie does do a deep dive into throughout, especially since Ken's mother mysteriously disappeared, with the both of them searching for her in their own ways. While Ultraman Rising is undoubtedly a superhero movie in the sense that it's about a superhero defeating a quote-unquote bad guy, I think what made Ultraman Rising stand out from the rest of the children's superhero movie genre is that it actually isn't a superhero movie. Ultraman Rising to me was a movie about family, about fathers and sons, about mothers and their daughters, about being a kid, growing up, having conflicts, maturing, and realizing the beauty of what you have. Ken and his father were not the most ideal family, broken up by tragedy, responsibility, and something that they thought that was bigger than them. But in the end, they knew that all they had was each other. Similarly, when Ken was facing all those challenges having a pseudo-family of his own with Emmy the kaiju, the importance of taking care of each other and having each other's back takes the driver's seat in all those interactions. And that's not to say the antagonists of the film don't have their good points too. Dr. Onda, the main antagonist and the head of the Kaiju Defense Force, which is a government agency that is tasked to eliminate the kaiju threat, also uses family as his main motivator. Dr. Onda's family was killed during a kaiju attack that ravaged the city in the past, and Ultraman was unable to save them. So even in Dr. Onda's final moments, he thought about his family and his loved ones, even as he was about to take his own life to destroy Ultraman and the kaiju. Ultraman Rising isn't a flawless movie. They introduced a lot of random stuff pretty late into the movie, like the Kaiju Island and things that I guess is just setting up the sequel, and I felt like characters like Ami could have been explored further. But then again, it's a kids movie, and it's supposed to entertain kids, so I wouldn't want to put too much emphasis on diving into the pains and difficulties of maintaining a family in the movie. But hey, no movie's perfect. Not to sound like an IGN review, but I truly do think that Ultraman Rising has a little bit of something for everyone here. In so many ways, I can see parts of myself, my family, and even sometimes my friends in the many relationships and characters in the film. It's a movie that is both heartbreaking and heartwarming. It can be funny but also depressing, and has some pretty damn good fight scenes mixed in there as well. Like I said at the start of the video, Ultraman Rising told a story that has nothing to do with superheroes and everything to do with superheroes at the same time. While that might mean absolutely nothing to some, I think to me, it's everything the movie is about.